In 1995, on an ordinary morning in the southern United States, the alarm clock rang on time as usual, waking the sleepy Grace. Grace had a family that others envied. Her husband Eddie was a lawyer at a prestigious firm with a high income, but he never strayed, and the couple had been happily married for decades. Grace managed the finances at her father Wiley's horse ranch. With the winter equestrian competition approaching, she had to check in with her father every day. After parting ways with her husband at the crossroads of their respective jobs, Grace hadn't walked far when she suddenly slapped her forehead. She had forgotten her daughter Caroline at home. Although Caroline was still young, her talent and skills in equestrianism far surpassed those of her peers. However, Caroline was no longer satisfied with riding ponies. Once at the ranch, she would pester her grandfather Wiley, clamoring to switch to a real horse for redemption. But her small frame was even shorter than a horse's leg, so how could Wiley dare to take the risk of letting her ride? After finally calming Caroline down, he pushed open the door to his daughter's office to inform her of an important matter. It turned out that Wiley had just splurged $150,000 at an auction to buy last year's champion horse, Goodwill. He firmly believed that Goodwill would help him win the top prize at the equestrian competition. As for the originally planned horse for redemption, it could wait until next year. Grace immediately voiced her objections. Their horse trainer Hank had been training Redemption for so long, hoping to make a splash in this competition. If it didn't participate, Hank would surely be unhappy. Moreover, her father had spent $150,000 without consulting her, the financial manager, which was simply outrageous. But Wiley dismissed his daughter's objections, arrogantly stating, "I am the head of the household, the owner of the entire ranch. Who dares to question me?" Due to her domineering father's stubbornness, figuring out how to make Hank accept the fact that Redemption wouldn't compete became Grace's biggest challenge. Watching Hank storm out in anger, she felt a headache coming on. With the charity meeting approaching, Grace had no choice but to temporarily set aside her worries and leave. However, shortly after she started driving, her sister Emma shouted and chased after her. Grace had forgotten to take her daughter with her again. The members attending the charity meeting were all wealthy ladies with ample time. They were preparing to jointly publish a free cookbook, and Grace suggested that the cookbook should not use the title Mrs. So-and-so, but rather everyone's own names. However, Linda immediately opposed this, feeling proud to carry her husband's surname. Linda still believed that marrying her current husband was the greatest fortune of her life. Despite being a proposal initiated by Grace, she often feels like such a lucky person deep down. Reflecting on her romance with Eddie during their college years, it's surprising that they smoothly walked into marriage and now have such a clever and lively daughter. No matter how many frustrations she faces at work, as long as she comes home and talks to her husband, watching their daughter act cute, all her worries disappear. After the charity meeting, Grace took her daughter to buy riding clothes. While waiting for the red light at an intersection, she inadvertently caught sight of Eddie passionately kissing another woman by the roadside. Grace's mind went blank in an instant, and she dazedly drove home, wanting to have a good talk with her husband when he returned. Grace waited anxiously until 11 p.m., but he still hadn't come home. Eddie left a message on the phone, claiming he was having dinner with a client. The longer Grace waited, the more uneasy she felt. She suddenly had a premonition that the so-called dinner with a client was just another lie made up by Eddie. Grace didn't even have time to change into her pajamas. She simply threw on a coat and took her daughter out to find him. Sure enough, she found Eddie in a tavern, happily chatting with the woman he had kissed earlier that day. Grace couldn't believe it. The seemingly loving life she thought they had was all an illusion. Eddie's face changed drastically when he saw her sudden appearance, and he rushed out of the tavern, arguing that the person from earlier wasn't him, even turning the tables to accuse Grace of embarrassing him with her disheveled appearance. At that moment, there were indeed many onlookers by the tavern window. Grace knew that continuing to make a scene would only add to the ridicule, so she stopped arguing and, with tears of anger in her eyes, drove her daughter back to her parents' home. That night, Grace went to stay with her sister Emma. After hearing about Eddie's infidelity, Emma wished she could punch that unfaithful man. Her sister's support brought Grace some comfort, but that comfort vanished the next morning when their father arrived. The news of Grace and Eddie's argument on the street had spread throughout the entire town. An enraged Wiley knocked on the door early in the morning, accusing Grace of running around in her pajamas and embarrassing the whole family. He even absurdly stated, "What's wrong with making mistakes? Which man doesn't make mistakes?" Grace didn't expect that instead of receiving comfort from her father, she would be scolded, and the injustice in her heart nearly brought her to tears. To her surprise, her mother Georgia, who usually dotes on her, also advised her not to be upset about this matter. Georgia believed that infidelity in marriage is very common, that everyone makes mistakes, and that a wife's responsibility is to help correct those mistakes without causing a public spectacle for everyone to laugh at. Georgia advised, "Think about how much Caroline loves him. Do you really want to shatter her perfect image of her father?" After a night of torment, Eddie visited early in the morning, wanting to take his wife and daughter home. Emma, to vent her sister's anger, welcomed him in with a smile, only to kick him hard in the groin the next moment, causing Eddie to fall to the ground in pain, crying out. Although Grace resented his betrayal, after years of marriage, seeing him in such a state still made her feel a bit of pity. Seeing this, Eddie mistakenly thought Grace's attitude had softened and immediately apologized, preparing to take her home. Grace, noticing his opportunism, showed her disgust again. "Did you think about our daughter when you cheated? Did you think about this family? What right do you have to come and beg for forgiveness? I'm not the kind of woman who can live under the same roof with a husband who cheats. Get out of here." After being sent home in disgrace, Eddie woke up the next day looking at the empty pillow beside him, realizing he could no longer find that warmth, and his heart was filled with regret. Although Grace had fought fiercely with Eddie to maintain her daughter's image of her father, she didn't dare reveal any reasons to Caroline. Anyway, now that they had moved back to her parents' house, under Hank's guidance, her daughter was busy practicing equestrian skills every day and had no time to ask about the details. Hank promised Grace that he wouldn't leave until the equestrian competition was over, but once the competition ended, he would seek another path. The champion horse, Good Heart, was also delivered to the stable today by the trainer Jimmy. At this moment, Wiley was riding Good Heart, galloping in the arena, but suddenly stopped before the hurdle. He felt a bit embarrassed, and when Jimmy saw this, he offered guidance. But Wiley, feeling humiliated, scolded, "I was jumping hurdles on horseback before you were even born. What right do you have to point fingers at me?" During dinner, Wiley brought up Eddie again to Grace. "I'm about to discuss a big business deal with Eddie's father, so don't cause any trouble right now. Eddie also told me he sincerely regrets his actions. What a responsible husband he is. Can't you be a bit more understanding and forgive him?" Grace could hardly believe her ears. Clearly, she was the victim, yet in her father's words, she had become the one at fault. Angry, Grace slammed her plate down and left the table, and Emma, unable to watch any longer, chased after her. Grace suddenly realized that ever since she discovered her husband's infidelity, her once happy life had taken a sharp turn for the worse. She began to doubt the trajectory of her life over the past few decades. She didn't understand why she had given up her beloved veterinary profession, dropping out without even getting her diploma to return to the stable to work for her father. At this moment, Emma handed over an old photo from the dance party and reminded, "Do you remember it was you who took the initiative to invite Eddie? Everything is your own choice." She wanted her sister to understand that all current life situations do not happen by chance. Since you chose it yourself, you must bear the corresponding consequences. Right now, simply avoiding and resenting won't solve any problems. But Grace was still angry and ignored her sister's advice, turning to attend the charity event that day. However, as soon as Grace entered, she was stopped by Mrs. Lowry. It turned out that news of her separation from Eddie had spread throughout the town. Mrs. Lowry thought it was her fault and confessed to Grace that she had had an affair with Eddie, hoping to gain her forgiveness. Grace was shocked to find out that her husband's affair involved more than one person, and she was furious to the point of losing her sanity. So when the meeting officially started, Grace stood up and directly questioned, "Is there anyone here who has had a relationship with Eddie?" Seeing that no one spoke, she decided to expose all the hidden secrets of everyone present. The scene immediately fell into chaos, and the few ladies named hurriedly fled the scene. News of Grace's uproar at the meeting quickly reached Eddie. He called his wife, pleading with her to stop the commotion, or else the only option left for them would be divorce. Eddie did not want a divorce, and neither did Grace. When she heard the word divorce, she froze in place. She couldn't help but ask herself, can she really let go? Can she really give up decades of feelings? Before going to bed, the horse trainer Jimmy knocked on Grace's door and told her that Caroline was sleeping in the stable. Although Grace said nothing, the tense relationship between her and Eddie could not be hidden from the eyes of the child. Under the overwhelming sense of insecurity, Caroline had to redeem herself every night to stay with her beloved horse. Looking at her daughter's tired little face, Grace's heart ached. She promised her daughter that everything would get better soon. But how could she overcome that mental hurdle herself? After lulling her daughter to sleep, Grace found herself unable to sleep. Fortunately, with Jimmy's company, chatting with her helped ease the night, making it not too unbearable. Grace developed a bit of affection for the new horse trainer and planned to invite Jimmy over for dinner another day. The next day, while helping Aunt Rue in the kitchen, Grace mentioned that Eddie had invited her to dinner at a restaurant that night. Aunt Rue shook her head repeatedly. That Eddie is very clever. He chose a public place because he is afraid you will get angry. Listen to your aunt. Bring Eddie home and make him a special dinner. Remember to add some spoiled caviar to the salmon, because sometimes a near-death experience can teach a man how to think correctly. Under Aunt Rue's suggestion, the dinner was changed to their home. However, as soon as the two met, the bitterness in Grace's words made Eddie step back repeatedly. She was still upset about not becoming a veterinarian, resenting the unexpected pregnancy at that time, and also resenting Eddie's proposal back then. Eddie had heard these complaints so many times over the years that his ears were almost calloused, and a hint of anger had crept into his brow. Eddie actually loved Grace very much, but he felt that Grace was always complaining, always busy with work, blaming him for everything wrong. This unreciprocated feeling led Eddie down the wrong path, but he had never forgotten how loving they once were. Eddie passionately analyzed. We clearly loved each other so much before. What happened? You no longer kiss me, no longer pay attention to me. How did we become so distant? Grace, can you give me another chance? These words made Grace feel guilty. She suddenly realized that she had indeed neglected her husband for a long time. However, before she could respond, Eddie collapsed on the ground, holding his stomach. Grace remembered the jar of spoiled caviar and hurriedly took Eddie to the hospital for emergency treatment. While waiting for the rescue, her mother Georgia came over, blaming her daughter's actions as too extreme. She shared a long-hidden secret about her marriage with Wiley, hoping her daughter could learn to endure. But Grace was filled with extreme guilt and anger, and her mother's persuasion was like adding fuel to the fire. Grace publicly exposed the truth. She had long known about her father's affair with Annie, and her mother's tolerance over the years was just a joke in her eyes. But seeing her mother leave with a look of grievance, Grace couldn't help but resent herself for speaking too harshly. When she anxiously entered the hospital room, the first thing Eddie said upon waking was to ask her to find a lawyer and prepare for a divorce. On the other hand, after arguing with her daughter, Georgia suddenly realized something. When Wiley returned home, she firmly refused to let him in. Georgia actually had no shortage of suitors. She had once been attracted to a handsome doctor, but she chose to respect her marriage and uphold her principles. She scolded, "Wiley, you think you can act all high and mighty just because you have some money, living it up outside, and now our daughter's heart is broken, yet you're still worried about business. How could I ever like someone so cold-blooded? I warn you, if you dare cross this threshold, I'll have the workers throw you out." That night, Georgia completely vented her long-suppressed dissatisfaction and felt a great sense of relief. The usually domineering Wiley was left speechless after being scolded by his wife. He was kept outside, wandering in the yard like a defeated general. After Grace returned home and apologized to her mother, Georgia smiled and waved her hand, thanking her daughter for helping her vent her anger. After Eddie was discharged from the hospital, he immediately scheduled a meeting with the famous divorce lawyer Jack. Jack was skilled at turning black into white, and even though Eddie had cheated first, it would be easy for him to help him gain custody. However, as he listened to Jack constantly belittle Grace in his descriptions, Eddie felt a wave of annoyance. No, Grace is a very responsible person towards the family. She doesn't smoke or drink. You can't slander her like this. Forget it, Jack, I won't get divorced. During the days when she was out of contact with Eddie, Grace felt listless every day. She felt an emptiness in her heart. Fortunately, Jimmy's company allowed her to temporarily forget her sadness, and tonight she decided to take action to completely forget Eddie. However, when she followed Jimmy to the hotel, she was surprised to find that it was the very place where she had her first date with Eddie. The beautiful memories of the past surfaced in her mind, making her feel a strong discomfort as Jimmy got closer. Grace finally realized the truth. She couldn't forget Eddie at all and couldn't accept other men. Jimmy was very considerate. He didn't blame Grace, but instead suggested that she have a good talk with Eddie. Grace decided to give herself a chance and also give this relationship a chance. She felt relieved and conveyed this joy to her daughter. "Caroline, haven't you always wanted to ride in the redemption competition? Mom promises you. Do your best tomorrow. I'm looking forward to your performance." The next day, the equestrian competition kicked off, and the long-missing Eddie also appeared at the venue to cheer for his daughter. Grace looked at him, her eyes slightly moist. In the children's competition, Caroline performed perfectly and won first place. Wiley proudly boasted to others that she was his granddaughter, and Grace pinned her championship badge from her youth onto her daughter. Grace took the initiative to hand her daughter over to Eddie, allowing them to reminisce, and reminded Eddie to bring their daughter to watch the adult competition tomorrow. Although both of them had seen through their feelings, no one dared to take the first step towards reconciliation. That night, Wiley was gloomy because he was sent to the barn to rest. He saw the doctor pursuing Georgia in the yard and felt jealous, approaching him with a fist raised. But fortunately, he was stopped by his daughters. Then, Grace told her father that she had agreed to let Hank ride in the redemption competition tomorrow. Wiley was furious upon hearing this, believing that Grace had betrayed him. But Grace did not back down. She stated that she had resigned and would return to school to continue her studies and pursue her dream of becoming a veterinarian after the competition. In the adult finals, Hank performed excellently, winning the highest score of the entire event. As the three-time champion, Wiley made his appearance last, but made a mistake on the most difficult jump, only securing third place. After Hank won the championship, Wiley couldn't hide his disappointment, but he finally bowed to aging and reality. Georgia came to his side, silently holding his hand to provide companionship. Wiley perked up, raised a glass to congratulate at the celebration banquet, and decided to kindly return the horses to Jimmy for training, even promising to share half of the ownership with him in the future. At the celebration banquet, Eddie kept staring at Grace. Mrs. Mary told Grace that she had seen Eddie dining with divorce lawyer Jack and advised her to prepare early. Grace was panic-stricken and rushed in front of Eddie, wanting to salvage the situation. Habitually masking her feelings with blame, she accused Eddie of bringing a lawyer to the restaurant. Eddie understood the love in her eyes, took her hand, and danced a passionate dance in front of everyone, as if they had returned to the moment they first met in their youth. After the dance, Wiley also took the initiative to apologize to his daughter, and the father-daughter rift was resolved. After the dinner, Eddie climbed upstairs and entered the bedroom, passionately confessing to Grace, pleading for forgiveness, and promising to communicate more actively in the future. Grace also realized that the issues in their marriage were not solely one person's fault. She needed to change as well. Not long after, Grace officially enrolled in veterinary school to continue pursuing her dreams. After school, she declined her classmates' invitations and hurried home. Upon opening the door, she found her husband Eddie busy at the stove. Joyful laughter echoed in every corner of the home.